professor at the University of Southern California. He taught one of my classes last semester and disclosed with the class at the beginning of the semester that he also has ADHD. His name is Morton Bay, and he's a adjunct professor and research fellow at USC for communication. And he has a PhD in information studies from UCLA as well, and spent the last 2 decades researching social media and emerging technologies. If anyone can tell you or show you that it can be done, it's got to be someone who spent years in this space overcoming ADHD and dealing with it. So yeah, without further ado, here's the conversation.
When did you learn of your diagnosis, and how did that shape your experience in academic, personal, or professional settings?
I was diagnosed while I was doing my PhD. I was in my dissertation process when a friend of mine was going up to be tested for ADHD, and I had never really thought about that until I heard her talk about the symptoms, and I was like, that sounds like me, you know. So I went to my psychiatrist and went through all the tests and was told at the end that I was textbook ADHD. So I was like, okay, and of course, as with most people, most adults that are diagnosed with it, it just cleared up a whole bunch of things, right? It was like, oh, that's why I can't hold on to a normal 8 to 5 job or 9 to 5 job, or have had difficulties in my life doing that at least. That's why, I work in certain ways. That's why some things really make it difficult for me to concentrate. There's just a whole bunch of things that, even going back to my childhood, that all of a sudden fell into place. So that was a lot of relief, right? But since I was writing my dissertation and doing my dissertation research, it also meant that I had to rethink the way I was working on that. And so the first thing I did was to inform my advisor and say, well, the first thing I did was call my parents about it, but after that I called my advisor, or talked to my advisor, and said, listen, I've just been diagnosed with ADHD, and I think I need to change the way I'm working on this. And I'm happy to say that she was incredibly supportive of it, and really really open to supporting me actually getting more time to do it. So I ended up taking an extra year. It was actually because of the medication. So because medication for ADHD is stimulants, it took me about 6 months to figure out what the right dosage was, and I slept very unevenly during that time. There were nights where I barely slept at all for weeks on end, and then there were times when I just slept all the time, and so there was a lot of adjustment going on there, and that took about 6 months. I think the ADHD really came to the fore, in a sense, because one of the ways it has expressed itself for me over the years is not being able to stick with one thing very long. And that is absolutely a consequence of the ADHD. And it has impacted my academic performance, absolutely. I think, I've been fortunate that I've been lucky in some cases. Some of it is white male privilege. It's, I think I think what I learned once I got into college, because all of a sudden, when I didn't apply myself, I failed classes all of a sudden, I was like, what?
Yeah.
I think I learned then how to really say, okay, I need to get this done, and then just focus, super laser focused on something for a bit, and then move on. That's one of the places I learned that, I think. But yeah, I mean, when I was in college, I was musical director at a student radio station. I was doing a weekly TV show. I was writing if you can imagine, like the Daily Trojan, but national. And I was playing in a band. I mean, how many things can you do on the side, right?
Yeah.
And now that I think about it, I think, how the hell did I do that? I think the advice is to if you have ADHD in that regard, to take it seriously. in general, actually, I think that one of the things I really try to uh, get people to understand is that mental conditions are just as physical usually as any sort of physical disability, and you need to think about it that way. It is, if you can use it to your advantage, but you can also um, ignore it because of social norms or something, that's going to make it worse.
Mhm.
So I think it's very important to take it seriously and get the treatment so that you can be disciplined. But also, the other side of that is to forgive yourself a lot and to say, oh, okay, I messed up on this paper because I was doing too many things at once. I will not do that next time, but I'm going to forgive myself and learn from it.
Mhm.
Because what happens with ADHD for a lot of people is that when they have it growing up, they're told their entire life that they are doing things wrong. Uh, because ADHD makes you, we have a different, those of us with ADHD have a different reality, basically. We have a different perspective on reality than other people. And that means that we will do things in a way where people think is crazy
Mhm.
or weird, and not doesn't stick with the norm. So you're told your entire childhood that the way you look at things, the way you understand things, and the way you do things is wrong.
Mhm.
And so shame and guilt are two I would always almost call them comorbidities with ADHD, and it does, in like it did in my case, lead to for many people a life of depression. Understand that if you mess up one time, that's not going to alter the entire trajectory of your life.
Mhm.
It's okay. You'll be fine. And but yeah, the one thing you have to do is learn from it.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was really helpful to hear. And I think like that's all of this stuff is something that I think is super relevant. A lot of these things that we struggle with ADHD, like sticking to one thing for an extended period of time, and not having our energy or interest kind of shift over to other things before we're actually done whatever
Mhm.
by whatever standards with that thing is something I know I struggle with a lot, and a lot of my friends do too. Um, of course, that doesn't mean that we're not able to have prolonged interest or passion in something, but just kind of doing something that I think feels concrete in the context of the world is often really difficult.
Mhm.
I think like pursuing a PhD and writing a book, like these are two things, for example, that I think are extremely concrete measures of.
A lot of it is about getting rid of obstacles,
Mm,
uh, or no, not obstacles, distractions. Like
mm,
literally removing yourself from the distractions that might be tempting. I I stay away from entire environments
mm,
that will suck me in if I get that will distract me. Gaming is one of them. I mean, I grew up with computer games. I'm sort of a first generation video gamer. But at one point, and this is long before I was diagnosed, this is just something I felt I needed to do. I literally just had to stop and remove myself completely from the gaming environment because I was spending so much time of it and and not progressing in anything else in my life. There have been plenty of times in since I got diagnosed with ADHD where I've been like, oh, maybe I can, you know, do this again. I just have to be, nope. And so removing yourself from temptations that way until it is absolutely responsible to do so, I think is a very important concrete step you can take when you're taking on a long-term project.
mhm,
ADHD people usually have things that they get really excited about more than others, and therefore will know a ton about. And so make sure that your long-term projects are about that. Because
mhm.
if you try to take on something for strategic reasons or because you think it's a good idea because somebody said so, or for career reasons, you're going to fail because you'll be so distracted and you'll be so bored. So it's really about trying, and that isn't always possible. It's not always possible for everyone to do that. That's one thing that academia affords, which is why I think there is an overrepresentation of people with ADHD in academia. There are three. I don't know if you know this, but there are three jobs that have overrepresentation of academia. It's sorry, of ADHD.
Uh,
It's academia, computer programming,
mhm.
and or coding, and music or art.
Last question is what sort of um, assumptions or incorrect or correct that people have or you've seen around online or in other places about ADHD? I think one big one that I've seen is like this idea that the use of technology can actually induce ADHD. And so that there's like a ADHD pandemic that's really not even about having ADHD and more about just like people who aren't disciplined, which I think is rather harmful for the people with ADHD. So I was wondering what sort of misjudgments or assumptions you have to deal with, and also if you do have information or opinions specifically on that tech ADHD side of things, what sort of information you have about that.
Let me address the last one first.
Hmm.
To induce actual changes in the neural networks of the brain
Mm.
that would work for ADHD, that would induce ADHD,
Hmm.
you would have to be using technology in very deep ways uh, when you are 1 to 2 years old,
Mm.
maybe even younger. And that doesn't happen, obviously, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, there are some theories that say that it's a trauma response, which would make sense in
Mm.
my case, but it is something that happens very, very early,
Mm.
uh, long before children usually have access to technology.
Mm.
What I think some people confuse it with is that there are effects of technology use, especially social media, especially particular phone apps
Mhm.
that will overload a person,
Mhm.
and that goes for anyone.
Mm.
So there are these overload situations where there's too much information, there's too much information consumption, that it's very, very difficult to focus and go deep. But that's not ADHD. That is what that is a that's a people if people who have that overload
Mhm.
stop and get better habits with their technology, they will get better.
Mm.
We won't. We will still, maybe our ADHD will return to normal levels, but we will still have it, right?
Mm. Mm.
And so it's not like I personally don't think that there is a relation between them. And it goes to this idea that if you are forgetful and confused and have a hard time focusing, that automatically you have ADHD. No, it's
Mm.
not. It's mostly to help others, but it's also to have a conversation about what the hell this is, you know? But I think the whole tech thing is an important conversation. We have seen a drop in attention spans, but that's for a lot of different reasons. It's because people don't we're not in a culture where we need to remember things anymore, for example,
Mm.
right? Um, or we need to remember less.
Yeah.
So we are trained less in remembering things, which then again leads to having less knowledge readily available to us. And that's cultural. It's social. I think, a lot of people say, well, the other one is objectively better than the other. I'm not sure that's true. I'd say the jury is still out on that one. I mean, it reminds me of the autism and vaccine nonsense. There is definitely evidence that high frequency of use of smartphones and social media will give you ADHD-like symptoms, but there's a very big difference from that and to actually having ADHD. You can get rid of your ADHD-like symptoms. We can't get rid of our ADHD. So that I think that's a really important thing to distinguish.